Hi everybody, it's me, Mr. McNichol. Thanks for watching here. I'm going to be giving this first lecture, which is dated August 24th, 2022. Now, this should be posted along with a PDF showing the parts of an argument and another PDF which will be showing the logical fallacies. And so I'm going to ask you folks to basically look those over. I will also post it. Sorry for scratching my nose, things get itchy. Also, if you notice that I end up looking down a bit, it's because the camera is above my monitor and I'm going to be looking down at my monitor a couple of times just to basically make sure that I'm giving you the right information. But as I said, in this particular lecture, you're going to be hearing, number one, the parts of a logical argument. And you're also going to be seeing what are called logical fallacies. Oftentimes when we make an argument, we think about, as somebody mentioned when I had folks brainstorming, there's anger involved, there could be conflict involved, but in a logical argument, it's done right, a logical argument is designed to be given without anger, without emotion. It's there basically to convince a person to adopt your position. There's a right way and a wrong way to do that. So we're going to be looking at the basic parts of a logical argument tonight, and then we're going to be looking at the mistakes that a lot of us make when we try to make an argument. Okay? So I've included, as I said, a PDF which has the parts of an argument and a piece that shows the logical fallacies. Okay? I'm also going to be posting a small worksheet which you folks can fill in and upload for a grade. And then we're going to continue learning how to put together an argumentative paper when we meet again next Monday. So, without further ado, let's go into this. Now, you can go down right now. I'm going to be posting this tonight. Yeah, I'm doing this on Tuesday afternoon. I'll be posting the piece that says logical arguments. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to find that right now. There we are. It's a logical arguments PDF, so you can look at that while I'm talking. Now in this unit, we're going to learn how to spot illogical arguments, we're going to construct logical arguments, and you're going to write out your arguments in proper written communicative formats. Now, logic itself, we hear it all the time. People my age group remember a character named Mr. Spock from TV who used logic to try and guide his every action. Logic basically, in this context, the way we're going to use logic here, the way we're going to define logic here, logic is a science, okay? It's an exact thing, okay? Logic is a science that evaluates arguments. Is this a really valid argument? Now, an argument, first thing we ever do when we're going to have a real argument, in this sense, we're going to define our terms. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? Here, an argument is a group of statements, including one or more premises, we're going to find out what those are in a bit, and only one conclusion. Arguments, we don't say if they're necessarily right or wrong. We say if they are valid or invalid, based on the stuff in them, on the premises that the arguments are built on. Okay? Now, before we get to premises, though, a term is the most simple and basic unit of meaning. It is the subject or predicate of a proposition. You don't have to know that too much, though. I wouldn't worry about it if it doesn't make sense. A term has to be either clear or unclear. So, if somebody, for example, says, "Are you in favor of old people?" What do you mean by in favor of? That's a term. If you're in favor of old people, well, what do you mean by old people? To my kids, I'm 52. I'm an old man. To somebody who is 70, though, I'm still considered pretty young and spry. So when you're going to have an argument, the first thing you've got to do is define your terms, like we're doing here now. A proposition, okay, asserts a relation of terms in a sentence that's either true or false. A proposition will say something like, "The cat is on the mat," or "all men are mortal." Okay? That is a proposition. Now, a premise is a proposition. a premise is a kind of a proposition, and we see it in an argument. And a proposition provides reason or support for the conclusion. You can have one or many premises in an argument, but you can only have one conclusion. So if you look at the PDF, okay, look at the bottom, you'll see a bunch of bright colored circles there. This is the classic argument when we try to show what a logical argument looks like. This is what most people use. And I used this, you may remember, on Monday. Okay. There are two premises, or propositions. I'll just say premise, it's a little easier. You've got two premises. Okay. All men are mortal, and Socrates is a man. Well, the terms here are men and mortal. Now, when we define men, are we saying only the male of the species with an X and Y chromosome? No. We're talking about all members of the human race, okay? All men, or all members of the human race, that's how we're defining men here, are mortal. What does mortal mean? Well, that's a term. Mortal means eventually you die. From whatever reason, intentional, accidental, whatever it may be. So we have some terms here that we've defined. We've defined men as the human race and mortal as all things die. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. If all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. Men and mortal are terms. All men are mortal and Socrates is a man are both an example of a premise. And the conclusion, therefore, Socrates is mortal. And the whole thing, with a big green circle around it, is the argument. Okay? Hope that makes sense. Okay? And that's the first part of our lecture today. Okay, well, if you have any questions, I'm really glad that a number of you have emailed me with, Mr. McNichol, I can't quite make my avatar picture come right, but most folks have been able to figure it out. Quick Call Tech, okay, they've got those listed on the TCC website. If you're still having difficulty when you're calling tech support, call me. Maybe I can find out who you really need to talk to in those situations. Okay? Now we're going to look at the next part here. Okay? The next part are called logical fallacies, and it's been uploaded to the same spot that this lecture and the piece on logical arguments have been. Okay? So this is a basically a PowerPoint presentation, and here's what it is. A logical fallacy is an error. It's a wrong thing. A logical fallacy is an error, and it makes an argument invalid. Now, there's hundreds of fallacies, but we're going to look at a little less than 20 of them today. Okay? First one. This is a fancy one. A lot of these have fancy names, but they really mean pretty simple things. The first one is called false dichotomy. You're given only two choices, but when in reality, there's many, many more that you could look at. So, one that I heard some folks arguing about once at one point, person A says you must either choose science and be rational, or choose faith and be an idiot who won't think for themselves. Only two choices are given there. Be science, choose science alone, which the speaker thinks makes you a rational person, or live a life of faith, which makes you an idiot. There's a third way. Maybe I could choose to believe both in God and science. Now, of course, I'm going to mention this. When you see different sides of an argument, yes. Are there compelling arguments both for someone to follow science or to follow faith? Absolutely. However, I'm showing you the wrong way to argue those positions. Okay? So, one person, for example, likes to use memes. Okay? One person likes to say, for example, that Christianity is anti-science. Well, there were many men of faith who were very pro-science, and they are evidence that a third way exists. Okay? That's what person B says in this slide. I choose to believe in both God and science. Now the next one is called, go down to the next page, the next slide, false analogy. You assume that because two things are similar in one way, that they're going to be exactly similar, or so similar they are practically indistinguishable. Okay? Little dog Bert little dog there is talking to little Ratbert from an old comic strip called Dilbert. Okay? And Ratbert says, well, I feel that I don't have a lot of wisdom. It's all bad analogies. Dogbert says, well, you know, Ratbert, good wine has to age before it's perfect. Ratbert thinks he's like fine wine. You mean I'll get smarter as I get older? Yeah, says Dogbert, to the degree that you are like a grape. See, wine gets better as it gets older. Ratbert is not wine, however, so he is not for sure going to get better as he gets older. He might, but he's not a grape, he's not wine. And even if he does get better as he gets older, does that make him a bottle of wine? No. So this is a false analogy. Okay? The next argument is what they call from ignorance. That's the next slide. Just because something is not known to be true, people assume it's false. Have you ever seen the spaceship from the moon actually landing on the moon? Someone might say. If not, it can't be true. You can't prove it's true. Well, just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean it's not true. I haven't ever been to Australia. Now, if you don't believe in Australia, I'm not going to be able to convince you. I could give you evidence. I could say I've met people from Australia. I've seen pictures of Australia. I can see Australia on a map. But if you're determined not to believe in Australia, you could say the people were brainwashed, the pictures were faked, and so forth. Okay? But just saying, you've never been to Australia, therefore, doesn't exist. That's an argument from ignorance. That's a fallacy. Okay? Now, the next one is called slippery slope. In the slippery slope argument, a series of increasingly unacceptable consequences is drawn without evidence or precedent. Okay? Now, the key thing here is without evidence or precedent. For example, if when I was younger, my parents told me, if you try to do behavior X, it could lead to behavior Y and then behavior Z. Okay? And then things will go really bad for you. They brought up statistics and so forth to show, not that it was for sure, but very, very likely that if I did behavior X, it would lead to behavior Y and behavior Z for me. That was a convincing argument. A slippery slope becomes a fallacy when you don't offer any evidence for it, okay? So this was a popular bumper sticker when I was living in the Pacific Northwest. If we let children pray in public schools, soon they'll be burning atheists at the stake. Now, there have been compelling arguments raised for disallowing young people to pray either officially, led by school officials, or privately in public schools. However, when it's used like this, if we let little Jimmy pray in school, then we will be burning Judy at the stake with no evidence that it's going to be that way, with no precedent, or you can't point to me where that's happened in such a short period of time, then it becomes a slippery slope argument. Make sense? Please be aware too, I'm not taking any of these positions one way or the other. I am simply bringing them up as examples of poorly argued positions or arguments. Okay? Make sense? Great. Let's see. We're going to finish up with number 6. Okay? We will do more fallacies later on. Okay? But we're going to finish up here with number 6, with slide number 6 rather. It's called the appeal to force. In the appeal to force, consequences are threatened if the arguer's position is not adopted. Okay. So, anybody who's seen the movie Full Metal Jacket or any Army movie that has a screaming loud drill sergeant probably understands what's going on in the illustration I have over on the Logical Fallacies PowerPoint presentation. The sergeant is screaming at the recruit, "Drop and give me 20, maggot. Give me 20 push-ups." And the young man makes the crucial mistake. Anybody who's been in any version of the armed forces knows you don't ask why when they ask you to drop and give them 20 push-ups. But this young man does. Why? Well, in this case, however, the sergeant gives an invalid argument. Because I've got 3 stripes in my arm and I will rip your head off and punt it for extra points if you don't, maggot. Okay? Well, obviously he's not really going to do that level of violence to somebody. But what is undeniable is this recruit is being threatened with consequences if he does not rather do as he is told. Now again, we could argue whether this is necessary in a military environment. We can argue whether threats of violence against a recruit are acceptable or not in a military environment or out of a military environment. That's a separate issue. What we do have here is a case where consequences are threatened if you don't do as you're told, or if you do not, at least externally or on the outside, show that you will believe what you're being told. You're adopting their position. Okay? I'm a parent myself, and believe me, I know there's times when you can tell a child, clean your room. Why? I don't have time to explain this to your satisfaction. Just do it. Happened to me, happened to my kids. I am guilty of an invalid argument. Okay, so what we now have, we have gone through a total of 5 of the logical fallacies. We're going to go through some more next time. What I have left up on this particular piece here, there is a worksheet which you will need to go through and upload. Okay? You're going to be going through the worksheet, you're going to be identifying parts of a logical argument on the worksheet. Okay? Show me that you understand. This is a term, and this is a premise, and this is an argument. Okay? Remember, an argument doesn't have to be true or untrue, it simply has to be valid or invalid. If it says little green men live on Mars in the premise, we're going to assume, for the sake of argument, never heard that before, we're going to assume for the sake of argument that little green men live on Mars. Okay? And we'll go from there. And then there'll also be a couple of pieces where you are going to be looking at a series of logical fallacies. Okay? You're going to be looking at arguments that have one of these 5 fallacies that you have been looking at. Okay? One of the first 5 fallacies. And those, once again, are, just doing the recap here, false dichotomy, false analogy, from ignorance, slippery slope, and appeal to force. And you're basically going to identify which logical fallacy is being used in which argument. Fill in the blank with the one that's that should be there. First one's been done for you. All right, folks, that's my lecture for today. Get the stuff done, and I will see you on Monday. And as I said, I'm just starting here at TCC, and you are students, yes, but you also are adults. So if you've got anything that you think would help me be a better teacher for you, please shoot me an email, and we'll see what we can do. All right, thanks, folks, and I will see you on Monday. Get those pieces done and uploaded to the appropriate section on Canvas, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everyone. Good night.